You know you have a mail window up, Crystal.
Oh. Come here. Need that window up.
You're bothering them up.
All right, welcome everybody. We have quite a few people in the waiting room, so we're going to give people a few seconds to get settled. Thank you for being here today. We have a lot of participants that are going to be participating. So.
Trying. Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone.
Nice to virtually meet you.
Same here. Thank you.
I know that we had a pretty big list of registrants, so I think we'll give folks another minute or so to get in and get ready.
Yeah, we had almost 300 people register for this call today, so we're going to be a lot of people waiting to get in.
Well, you just let us know when you're ready then.
Okay. Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Crystal Garcia. I'm the training coordinator here at TASA. So I'm going to be your tour guide through today's webinar. And let's see, while we get started, I'm going to go ahead and have everybody just share with us who's in the room today. Pick the description or the category that best describes what you do. I know lots of us wear multiple hats.
Okay, I'm Alicia Lucky. I'm the hotline manager at the Rape Crisis Center. Oh, it's a poll. Sorry.
That's okay.
No worries. Super nice to know who you are and where you are.
We haven't gotten to be in big groups together in a long time. I'm just going to start randomly talking to people and introducing myself.
Yes.
Looks like we have a lot of victim advocates with us today. Okay. So I'll give us about 20 more seconds to go ahead. And if you're just now getting into the room, please select which category best describes you so we know a little bit about who's on the line today.
And Crystal, when we're ready, if you want to give us those numbers, that'd be great to have a sense of.
Yes, absolutely, I will.
It's nice to see all the hellos in the chat.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so I know that our webinar is going to go by fast today, so we're going to go ahead and turn things over to Jenny and Andrea. They are both coming from Safe Alliance. Jenny is the Director of Forensic Nursing, and Andrea is a victim advocate there. So they're going to be talking to us today about leadership, trauma-informed supervision and leadership. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. We can never have too much training in this area, so I will just go ahead and let them get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm Jenny Black. I'm a Director of Forensic Nursing at Safe Alliance in Austin. I've been doing this work since 2007 and have done many things the wrong way, and I'm glad to share the lessons that we've learned along the way. It's wonderful that everybody's here. Thank you so much for coming and spending your afternoon with us.
I want to echo that as well. As we've had the opportunity, a rare opportunity really in this work to step back and reflect and have these conversations, really realized how near and dear a topic this is to both of our hearts, both because of what we did as workers on the front line ourselves and now as people in leadership roles. So I guess I should introduce myself before we get going. I am Andrea. I am just a plain old advocate. I'm the manager of the Sexual Assault Victim Advocacy Program here at SAFE. Jenny and I have been working together one way or another since about 2012 when I got my start in the field. So glad to be with you today. If we're okay to move on to the next poll, we've got a couple of questions that we wanted to start this conversation with, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about what we're going to do together.
So we just wanted to get a sense of if folks have had any formal leadership and management training, because I think that may be a little hard to come by. It may be few and far between those of us that have been fortunate enough to have that experience.
Full disclosure, I identify as a self-taught leader.
Same.
I think that's true for a lot of us, the way that our field works and the way that many people only can afford to stay in this work for a few years. It's the few of us that manage to find a way to stick around that end up in leadership positions more often than not.
Sometimes if you hang around long enough, you just get voluntold. Crystal, what are our numbers looking like for that?
Crystal, you're on mute, my friend.
I'm over here talking to the cat. All right, so y'all are about 54% yes and 46 no.
Very
Oh,
cool.
good.
Very cool.
Glad
So
to hear that.
the follow-up question to that is, how many of you out there are aware of the research literature that is out there about this sort of thing, trauma-informed supervision, the evidence base, the theoretical framework, anything like that?
Here's a hint. There's a lot of it out there.
Yeah, people
And how are those
still
numbers
voting.
looking?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll say that I certainly had my opinions on how to do this kind of thing. But I had never really been exposed in a systematic way to any of the research that's out there. And that's part of what's been so rewarding about putting this together. It's finding that theoretical and evidence basis for what your gut kind of told you was the right thing to do. That's been my experience of this. And Jenny, I think yours as well. Okay.
Exactly that. It's been really wonderful because we all have strong opinions about how things should be done and how should we how we should work with each other and work with the people that we serve. And it's nice to see some of that reflected in academic literature in a way that sometimes reflects back more information, so we get a more well-rounded understanding of what it is we're up to, what's important, and other ways to implement those ideas and those approaches.
So thanks everybody for sharing about your role and your exposure to this kind of thing and your leadership training. I think we're ready to move on to the next slide. We'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to approach this today. Gosh, isn't it the truth? Lots of webinars, not a lot of time to watch them all. So we're going to weave these 3 different points through our presentation. We're not going to go first theory and concrete, then evidence-based, then how we bring this into our practice. These things are going to emerge hopefully more organically as we move through 4 different parts of the research literature that's out there that, as we started putting this together, kind of jumped out into focus as 4 places where we could focus our energy. We have to acknowledge Rick, who came up with this idea. We did a little webinar on the Duffy quality caring model back in August, and at the end he suggested, you guys should look at this with the sexual assault demonstration initiative. And so those are 2 of the places that we're going to be looking today. Really, really powerful idea. So thank you, Rick, wherever you are. I'm glad to have taken this ride to think that thought all the way through. And the other thing I wanted to say is, as we're going through this, if there are examples of how you apply these kinds of approaches in your practice that you want to share, by all means, put them in the chat. We'll get to them and talk about them if we possibly can. I think we're going to be pressed for time today, but I think neither Jenny nor I identify as experts on these things. We just believe in the principles and want to get better at taking care of our people.
Exactly that.
So I wanted to start with, this is a quote from one of the leaders at the 6 Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative sites. If you're not familiar with this report, it's a 100-pager, so it's a little bit of a heavy lift if your days are tending to be pretty full these days, as many of us have full days. But the very, very short version of what the Sexual Assault Demonstration Initiative was 6 different dual or multi-service organizations that provide services to sexual assault across the country, engaged in a really comprehensive and long-term change process to try to improve their community outreach, improve the quality of their services, improve the breadth of their services, the different kinds of folks that they felt competent serving. And go through and really commit to doing that work as organizations. And there are a number of lessons learned that, you know, I won't try to recap the entire SADE right here, but some of the themes that we wanted to pick up from it, basically that if you want to do the work of helping people transform their lives, that's something that has to be able to happen inside of your organization as well. This is, I believe, an executive director of one of the 6 organizations, one of the 6 that were more successful in doing this work. And we'll see this theme in the 3 other places that we're going to look closely at today. And I want to zoom in on the fact that sites that improved their culture around handling secondary traumatic stress, handling wellness. These were some of the sites that were more successful too in meeting their goals. If you want to talk about getting better as a sexual assault organization, you have to address secondary trauma at the same time. The 2 aren't disconnected. So yeah, I go to that next slide now. These are some examples of the different initiatives that one of the 6 sites put into place to take better care of their people. I really like this quote. This is one of the staffers at this particular agency. There's something that really resonates with me about this one, that whatever it is that we want to see happening in our interactions between staff and survivors, that needs to be happening inside the agency in some way as well. Couple of the things that really jump out to me about this list, with the exception of the last one, they're all organizational level solutions. And even that last one, I mean, it's making individual responsibility plugged into a bigger organizational structure. So all of us, of course, are familiar with stressing self-care, you know, encouraging people to use therapy, encouraging people to maintain positive relationships when they're not in the workplace, you know, stay connected with friends and family, that kind of thing. But these are all things that, you know, you as a leader and we as leaders have the ability to at least move towards, if not implement. That's one that really kind of hopped out to me. And I mean, again, just have to keep connecting this. I don't know if you guys ever feel this in your work, but it's easy when you're operating in a culture of scarcity to disconnect taking care of your people from the outcomes that you're trying to bring about for survivors. I think we all do this. I think people working direct service do this all the time. It's the constant pressure. And here we've got all of these things. They're connected to the thing that we want to see the most, which is survivor success. Jenny, were there any of these that jumped out at you thinking through this stuff?
They kind of all do. I think the transparency one is one that I think is often aspirational in our work and maybe a little bit more difficult to pull off, because when we're supervising other folks, we have it that we're supposed to have the answers, and we have it that we are supposed to be the experts, and we have it that we should know where we're going and what we're doing all the time. And sometimes being transparent about our own lacks, our own gaps, our own failures becomes difficult, but it is transformational. We're going to talk more about that as we go.
So I want to pick up those 4 themes and pull them into a 2009 study that you'll see cited if you take that trip down Google Scholar or PsycInfo or Web of Science or any of those places where you can look at more research studies than you have time to even begin to wrap your mind around. And before we get down into the nuts and bolts of the study, I want everybody to just take a moment and run down this list and think, well, how often can I answer often to these? And at the same time, think through, how often do you think the folks on your teams could answer often to these, or sometimes, or rarely? Some of these questions I think are really striking, and you know, I have a pretty strong emotional reaction to them from some of my experience working in other agencies. Things like, do you feel that you have opportunities to implement changes to practice or policy? Do you feel able to voice a different opinion from that held by the agency without risk of retribution? Do you feel that you have opportunities to represent your agency in the larger community? Do you feel powerless relative to others? Really, really pretty direct and powerful questions. If you've ever experienced a toxic work environment, these will probably be doing something to you, as they do to me.
And as we talk about trauma-informed leadership and supervision, you notice that none of this stuff has anything to do with the trauma that's associated of working with people who are in trauma. This is all difficulties that arise when our organizations aren't functioning as smoothly or as optimally as they can for all of the people that work in it. And as Andrea said earlier, those things are directly connected.
One thing that's fascinating, zooming out past the study, which I'll speak a little bit more directly to in a second, the findings that are out there really coalesce around things more like workplace dynamics, relationships in between colleagues, in between supervisors, and workplace culture, more than around workload. Some studies find that it's not even a particularly significant effect. How you know, like a percentage of folks experiencing trauma that's on a particular person's caseload actually turns out to be these organizational factors that have a greater influence. seems to be sort of a loose consensus between some of the research out there. But so the point that I want to make now that we've had a chance to kind of think through this scale together is the folks who scored the highest on this had the least likelihood of experiencing PTSD, which is a huge number, by the way. Thinking through possible reactions to seeing that half of the folks who responded to this survey met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD is, I think it's just striking. We know that this work is hard, but it should not give you a diagnosis. And yet, here's what we're seeing coming back from the field. But the biggest point of the study, of course, is that organizations in which you share power are the ones that are least likely to have folks experiencing severe trauma as a result of the work that they do. And the study looked at a number of different factors, some of them individual level, right? Like looking at whether or not somebody had a history of experiencing violence, various other kind of, individual level things. And those turned out to be more noise than signal. The really important pieces were, are you working in an environment in which you can take ideas and directions, be heard, be part of a discussion, share ownership of what your organization is doing? Or are you in an environment that is top down and restrictive and in which conflict is viewed as dangerous and to be avoided at all costs through any means necessary, right? There's a spectrum there, of course. And the other things that come out of the study, other strong effects were the quality rather than the quantity of clinical supervision, right? So it's not necessarily how often you meet, it's what are you doing with that time? And this was a measurement of participants' perceptions of this. So is that quality time? Are you talking about the work that you're doing? Do you feel seen and heard by your supervisor? Or is it more of a perfunctory thing? And of course, the other part, which should come as a surprise, I think, to none of us, that most of us will do the majority of our processing with people who understand what it is that we're seeing, right? So supportive relationships among coworkers, really notable, I think. That's more important than people having supportive relationships in their personal lives, because most people don't understand this stuff until they're right in the middle of it. And this is a big tie-in, I think, with something you'll see if you dig deep into the SADE. One of their findings was that the sites who had leaders with a pluralistic style, one in which multiple opinions could be entertained at the same time, the more of a shared responsibility for decision-making, these were the ones that were most successful in improving, all those kind of outcomes that we think about probably all the time, like even things as simple as number of survivors served or the demographics of survivors served, right? Are people from more marginalized communities coming in or not, right? So pluralistic leaders achieved greater success here. Folks who were top down had a harder time doing that. Before we quite hop into Duffy, I think I wanted to make a point about my own practice back there. And I'm not sure if this is something that other folks experience or not, but I noticed that I feel a lot of anxiety around doing things as a leader where I try to share decision-making responsibility. And the anxiety basically looks like this. Am I abdicating responsibility by taking a question to my team and saying, how do you guys think we should do this? Is that putting work on my team that is really my responsibility? And I think, there's not going to be one clear answer for that, but I know that when I look at research material like this, it makes some sense out of it for me conceptually. I think I get clearer, like, I'm not saying that I can't do this. I'm saying if we can all agree on this together, we're going to be safer. We're going to experience less trauma. And that's a really, really good thing. I don't know how many of us here have, put in their time doing direct service work in the trenches. Think about all of the things that you learn when you do that, all of the insights, all of the things that you can't capture on a form or a metric or an output, or even quite become clear to you when you're meeting with your supervisor. It's those insights that I always really wanted to be able to translate into improvement, and it just killed me when I couldn't, you know, and that seems to be the thing that the research is pointing at for me.
That's spectacular. I've had similar experiences and have found that when you are able to go to your team and say, what do you guys think? You end up with much richer conversation and much richer ability to move forward with a plan that everybody is on board with, and that actually ends up functioning better to get you where you're trying to go. One more point I wanted to make before we move to additional information is that the Women's Health Study, which was a 1-year follow-up for women who had been sexually assaulted that just concluded its enrollment about a year ago, found that that sexual assault survivors have the same PTSD rates at 6 months that this study reflects about people who are delivering the services. That's really painful. And I think it's something that is definitely worth digging into. And it makes me wonder if any of y'all are researchers out there. Would it be interesting to look at PTSD rates for survivors who seek services at organizations that have power sharing, if that thing trickles out to the way that people recover after sexual assault? We've got a question about send a link to the study. I'll do it at the end. If we run out of time, it's a women's health study out of the University of North Carolina's School of Anesthesiology, or their anesthesiology department. If you just look up women's health study, you'll end up there. Their preliminary findings are fascinating, y'all. This is the first time that there's ever been a research network to try and understand how people recover after a sexual assault. And I think that we are going to be utilizing that data for a long time to come. Anything else you want to throw in there, Andrea?
Well, there's always more to say, but we're at 2:27, so we should probably keep on trucking.
That's fair. All right, we are turning to my favorite nursing theorist, Dr. Joanne Duffy, and her quality caring model. So she has spent her academic lifetime working out how do we quantify what's important in a healthcare provider and patient relationship. And this is easily mapped on any service provider and any client. It's the same stuff. It doesn't have to be in a healthcare environment at all. What she has been able to do is take ideas about how is it that we provide care to the people that we care for? What does it look like? How do you describe it? And then how can you measure it? And that's a really great contribution to the field, because we can go in and take a look and see if we're actually doing the things that match this model, and we can seek to improve in areas where we may be falling short. So she has a lot to say about relationship-centered leadership, which is not a surprise considering that her ideas and theories are all about relationships. You know, what she says is that this view of leadership embraces human connections and interdependencies in organizations and ongoing relational processes of shared responsibility. These characteristics of authentic leadership are optimized by leader self-awareness and self-regulation and the co-creation of meaning in the workforce. So those 3 points you will hear us talk about as we move through the rest of this conversation with you all, because those 3 things I think are critical to being able to do the work of being in relationship with the people that you are supervising as well as the people that you are serving. There's a quote from her 2018 book, Quality Caring in Nursing and Health Systems, that was updated that year. I think it's the 3rd edition. But she says a leader's role is to cultivate an ethos of inclusion, a safe space for genuine dialogue, facilitate information and ongoing learning, and hold to professional standards, and allow health professionals to adapt their practice in ways that are meaningful to them. And then she quotes Brene Brown, which is kind of lovely, saying if leaders really want people to show up, speak out, take chances, and innovate, then they have to create cultures where people feel safe, where their belonging is not threatened by speaking out, and they're supported when they make decisions to brave the wilderness, stand alone, and speak the truth. And then Duffy goes on to say, such leadership sees the human person and the employee and vulnerability in the eyes of patients and families. It recognizes the inherent caring nature of health professionals and honors the special relationship they have with patients, families, and each others. And authentically caring for others provides leaders with the permission to give people direction, help them align with organizational goals, and provide affirmative, positive energy to get our work done. So let's pop to the next slide. Actually, maybe back one, the one with the light bulb on it, unless we're out of order somehow. Yeah, that guy. Thank you. So these are the quality caring behaviors that Duffy identified. Mutual problem solving, that's something we see with our patients and clients and with our colleagues. Attentive reassurance, the same. All of them have places in both of those relationship dynamics. When I started Eloise House, that's our clinic at Safe Place, there were two things really driving me. One of them was that we would be as good to our staff as we are to our patients. And the others was that we'd be extraordinarily good to our patients. And both of those came out of difficult experiences working in a hospital unit when I first became a nurse. And I have been fortunate enough to take those experiences and say, oh, I'm not going to do that when I grow up. And we've built something that's a little different. And it's been delightful to find the theoretical basis that supports the ideas that we have. Like Andrea said at the beginning, we all kind of have a gut feeling about how things ought to operate. And when we find academic and scientific literature that helps support our inclinations, it's a lovely thing.
And I think we'll get to this kind of towards the end, but I want to say, first of all, not only is this a really explicit claim that if you do the same kind of stuff that you do when you're taking care of somebody that your program sees to your staff, and that they're doing it to each other, that's what makes the difference. It doesn't matter what kind of scarcity you're facing, these are the things that are essential. That I think is just phenomenal. It truly is if you want it to happen in your clients' lives, make it happen in your staff's lives too, in your workplace culture. And that this creates the kind of change that, when we have to put on our manager hats and do budgets and look at impact metrics, that stuff moves forward when we do this. Counterintuitive.
It is a little bit. I'd never seen this in healthcare before. I'm just one person, but I know that it exists out there. And I know that enormous hospital systems and other healthcare systems have taken Duffy's model and had training on it and have implemented it from top to bottom. MD Anderson is probably the nearest one to us that has done this. So if you know anybody that is seeking services there, or if you have yourself, you may have seen some of these things reflected. I hope so. As we did the background research for this presentation, it occurred to us that it would be a lovely thing as we approach the end of this year, goodbye 2020, and the beginning of next year, to take the recommendations found in Sadie and to take these quality caring behaviors in Duffy and her recommendations about relation-based leadership and apply them to our programs, and to see where we are hitting the mark, where we are coming short, and then adjust as we go to be more in alignment with these findings. Everybody wants to be evidence-based. This is I think will be a great project.
Can we hop back to that last slide? Thanks. So something that will help you read this, it took me, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 rounds of conversation before I learned how to read this slide. So the first thing in the square is the benefit. And then the second thing in the same square is the challenge that comes along with it. So the way you read this is you say, okay, so if I go with this model, I'm going to get better engagement from my team, but then I'm going to have some new problems with keeping the purpose on track and keeping the momentum up. I'm going to experience less conflict, but then I'm going to have some uncomfortable and difficult encounters maybe that go along with that. That's how this works. Jenny, I know you've got a few here that really spoke to you. I certainly have mine as well.
Yeah, just from working in a hospital, and anybody that's had that experience has experienced the one that's on the middle of the bottom row, positive patient experiences versus time-consuming tasks. There's just not enough time in your shift to be able to give to people in a way that is meaningful and holistic and addresses all of their needs and concerns and answers their questions and accomplish all of the paperwork you have to do, all the running around you have to do, all of the additional communication that you have to do. And I think this is a pain point and a pressure point in the way that we deliver healthcare right now. It's been a really wonderful thing to move from being a floor nurse into the sexual assault field, because we see one patient at a time. We are not taking care of 4 people. We're not taking care of 8 people at once and juggling competing priorities along with our other responsibilities that we have. It's been a comfortable field to move into for that reason.
And the ones that spoke to me here, that first one, if you adopt this more relational style, it's true. People, I think, will come with you if you're able to authentically hold that space. All of a sudden you're in a discussion and you're not having to articulate how it's going to be and then figure out how everything else needs to fall into place around that. That's hard work of its own kind. But if you do become the kind of the center of a discussion, or the chair of a meeting is kind of how I think it feels like to me, then it's kind of like, how do I steer this kind of organically moving ship? And I think the other side of it for me is, I think you learn a lot from this, but there are these tricky moments that I feel where that negative, they're balancing separateness and engagement. How do we work with that? If we're all contributors, what do we do with our individual differences and all of that? How do we stay connected? That's a whole different set of problems to solve, I think, than what's the best way to, using the people we have, get from point A to point B. It feels like using a different part of your brain. I don't know if other people have experienced that, but again, just speaking to my own practice, it takes a different kind of doing, I think, to lead in that way. It really feels more like facilitation, I think, a lot of times for me. And I think it's true that, you do get to have a much richer conversation when you bring everybody's insights to the table, especially if, like many of us, we're not working with survivors directly anymore. The last time I worked directly with a survivor was, I don't know, June, July, something like that. So there's a lot of data that I just don't have. I need to hear from folks who are doing the work, what's working, what's not working. We're all, I'm sure, navigating some really difficult conversations around COVID protocols. I know that's been a huge challenge for our 2 teams. And I cannot solve that problem by myself, and I don't think that I should necessarily. And the question is, how can we get to the other side of this while taking care of each other and attending to one another and treating each other as people who know what they're doing?
So you may notice that none of this has to do with grant funding outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as
dun, dun, dun.
We go to the next slide, please. So this again comes from Duffy, and self-advancing systems is kind of a thought framework that we can drop the things that we've talked about into to try and understand how they interact together to create a system that regulates itself and corrects itself and creates out of itself. So back to high level view here. What Duffy tells us is that self-advancing systems effectively use relational capacity and practice improvement to naturally progress, grow, learn, and expand. when you're embedded in clinical processes, self-advancing systems enhance patient outcomes and expose the meaning of health professionals' work. There's that meaning thing again. And find the meaning in your work by staying close to the patient and genuinely relating to those with whom you work. So the idea here is that we start over on the left side where we see self and humans in relationship and others in communities. We practice relationship-centered professional encounters and use those 8 caring behaviors that she described. Our patients, clients, colleagues feel cared for, and the system can advance itself because people are engaging in the basic functions of their work and have relationships with each other that create openness and possibility for coming up with new processes and new procedures and better ways to handle maybe this individual client, but maybe other folks who come in with similar presentations. And then that information can spread from team to team or unit to unit. And if we move over to the far right side of this one, those systems advance well-being for patients and communities and health systems and everybody involved. So what we're talking about here is holistic and interpersonal and connected care that we provide to the people that seek our services. It's also evidence-based, and we work at it collaboratively with other professionals. Always patient-centered, always with caring relationships at the foundation.
So if you're asking yourself the question, which I think many of us live and die by in our jobs, how do I make a better organization? How do I run a better team? The answer, according to Duffy, is if everybody is taking care of everybody, that is the outcome. If you're seeing to that part of the process, if you're ensuring that there aren't power dynamics that are going south, if there aren't people who are getting squished in the process, whether they're clients or colleagues or supervisees, then the outcome you should expect is that everything improves, it all grows. It's a phenomenal claim.
It is, but it is evidence-based such that, like I said, MD Anderson and other large healthcare systems are adopting these practices because they are effective and they get people where they need to go. So something you said, Andrea, just made me think about, it's a daunting thing to take on, to be responsible for a team of people and their ability to be present and to say what's on their minds and to feel safe and all those kinds of things. There are so many factors that come into play with all of that, including our histories, personally, our histories at work, how our day has been, whether or not your cat is standing on your computer and you can't do your work, etc. All those kinds of things. And it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a one person's responsibility. When we all are sort of responsible for each other, that load is lightened, and we pull in other resources and we pull in other tools that help people feel safe and be effective in conversation and in collaboration and building new things. Duffy has a couple of reflections about leadership practice as it relates to self-advancing systems. And she recommends that folks just think about quality improvement processes that you have in place wherever it is that you work, and whether or not those things focus on outcomes measurement. Her recommendation is to look at processes and processes that are linked to specific outcomes, and whether or not your direct service folks are involved in genuine practice improvements. And if not, then what would it take to make it work that way? So it should be obvious by now that what we're talking about is not outcomes, but processes. What Duffy also says is that when you're focused on the outcomes, you get distracted from being present with the people that you're working with or the people that you're serving, and you lose an awareness of their uniqueness, what they bring into the context, what they bring into the relationship, what concerns they have, what health issues they have, what history they have. But not just that, it can also create some doubt about your own capability and that can reduce your ability to perform at the level you'd like to be working at.
A tie-in here that occurred to us while we were going through it, with Sadie, going back to that again as a touch point, agencies with a lot of outcome focus, you know, the folks who were basically trying to say the right things to the technical assistance providers and the funders, you know, which I think we all feel the pressure to say the right things in that way. At least I feel them in my work. Those were the agencies where there was the biggest struggle to look into blind spots. What do I not know that I don't know? Is that the direction that goes? Where is it that I think that I'm an expert, but actually I'm not? There's something important I'm missing. If you are focused on the numbers and the metrics, that's a question that you will not be able to ask yourself as gracefully as I think you can if you have, again, objective, most would argue, objective behaviors to look at. Are these things happening or are they not?
Right. This might be a good spot to drop in a couple of just practice tips for leadership that we may have come upon the hard way, or perhaps not. One of them is being able to be wrong. You have got to be able to regulate yourself well enough to be wrong in a conversation with people that supervise you or people that you supervise, because you can't always have the answers. And being able to be graceful about that and acknowledge it, I think, is critical to flexible leadership and leadership that allows you to stick your landing. If you are brittle around these things, you're not going to be able to stay in the work in the way that you could if you were able to be more flexible and gentler with yourself. Another one that we like to talk about is no. I tell my folks that if they can't tell me no when I ask them if they'll pick up another shift, then it's a little difficult to understand that their yes is actually a yes when they give me that. So one of the things that we talk about, even at the level of interviews, when people are interested in coming and working at our team, is this concept of no. You have to have your own voice. You have to be able to set limits. You have to be able to set boundaries with your supervisors so that you don't get stepped on and overrun and experience the burnout that comes with not being able to maintain work boundaries like that. Do you have any of those you want to throw in here, Andrea?
I think it's a great way to set the stage for the last piece of this that, you know, we wanted to bring in. That's something that I have been contemplating at least for the last 3 years, pretty intently, 4 years now, and that's this parallel process on the next slide. So those of you who are clinical supervisors will probably be very familiar with this. If you are a mental health professional and you've done clinical supervision, you're probably familiar with this as well. And the thing, Jenny, that you were saying that really made me think of this was there's this way that what is going on for our clients will go on in our teams. So sexual violence is a situation in which you say no, or you feel that you can't say no, and something awful happens to you. If we, in our leadership style and our workplace dynamics, are leaving people in a place where no is not exactly an option, that's where we have work to do. That's the bullseye right there. If you believe that people should be able to say no and have that no respected, change starts at home, I think, with that one. How on earth are you going to have a group of people who can't say no to you go out and take care of survivors? It's kind of ludicrous, I think, once you look at it that way. But I think we all know how work works, and that's a challenge. That's something where your leadership expertise, I think, can really pay some dividends. And it's some unconventional stuff, ultimately. You know, it doesn't necessarily occur to you when you manage to stick around this work long enough to lead a team that, oh, yeah, it's actually That may be one of the more important things. Rather than having brilliant ideas about how to do this, that, or the other thing, I need to support people in having those kind of boundaries with me in our relationships, right? So I will do my best not to belabor talking about parallel process too much. I think it's kind of famously difficult to give good examples of, and yet nobody, well, very few people in the psychology, psychoanalysis, and mental health world would deny that it's a phenomenon that happens. This is the best picture of it I could possibly find. You know, again, going back to, we need an evidence base for this. These folks actually put together a pretty cool empirical study of interactions between trainee therapists and their supervisors, and found that, yes, this is a thing, you can measure it with a great degree of sophistication. But again, the idea is in the relationship of therapist and client, and I think this holds true in some respects for nurse and patient, advocate and survivor, that's a power gradient, that's a power dynamic. Somebody is the expert, somebody is the help seeker. I think no matter how you approach it, that's always going to be true to some degree. And whatever it is that happens in between those two folks, see those arrows going up and down, that's going to then translate into the supervisory relationship as well. So, I mean, I don't feel like I can say no example I think is a good one, because it shows up in assault history. And I think we've seen it show up when people engage in help-seeking behaviors. I feel shame or resistance in asking for help. I feel shame or resistance in identifying what I really need. And I may not necessarily feel like it's safe to say to you, I hear that you're suggesting all these legal programs and telling me about my crime victims' rights, but that's not what I'm asking you for. I don't want to tell you that because I'm afraid I'm going to break the relationship. So your advocate might bring that same attitude unconsciously to your work with them one-on-one. They've just gotten finished working with somebody who really is having a hard time articulating what it is that they need. And suddenly that's in your supervisory relationship. So I threw together an example of this, which we can breeze through really, really quickly. This may be a better one to consult afterwards on the next slide. But the point of this, I won't work through it all the way for lack of time, but the point of this is that nobody in these interactions is doing something wrong. Like parallel process is not a failure. It's not like you failed to recognize this thing, or, oh, if you were a better manager or a better advocate, you know, you would not experience this. It's an inevitable phenomenon. I think it's the right way to look at it. And for me, the moral of the story is you need to be attuned as a supervisor to your own experience. Because if all of a sudden you're feeling a feeling like, in this example, I'm afraid to be seen without a solution, you might think to yourself, wonder how this is going on for the person I'm supervising. And I wonder how that was going on for that person's client. How is this somehow woven into the thread of the whole picture? And how can I try to metabolize it a little bit and see if we can send this chain of relationships in a new direction? So I can't fix that. It's not like I can just revolutionize the whole thing most of the time, but if I can model or try to make space for some kind of a different reality in which there's less fear in being forthright, or there's some way forward that doesn't feel shameful or terrifying, that's a good thing. So this may be a totally new thing to you. Again, if you're in the mental health field, it's probably quite familiar, but it's often something that I go to theoretically when I'm asking myself questions like, can this person really say no to me? Can I make this request simply and know that if there's truly not room on somebody's plate for whatever reason, they can say, Andrea, this won't fit on my plate, I can't do it. And that's fine, right? That doesn't cost points. That doesn't mean that, you know, you're more likely to be in trouble later on. All those things that are coming up in workplaces constantly, right? So it's something that has worked for me. And I think the other thing about it, Jenny, that you were setting the stage for in my mind was, the point isn't necessarily that you have to have already figured out how to be graceful about this and to not be brittle. The point might be you could model what it looks like to go from being trapped to being free in these little ways. And that could be actually a very impactful part of your work, even though it's not, well, I made this decision and we saw 10% more people last month, you know. It may greatly improve the quality of the work that you're doing, the quality of the ideas that you're generating. These may be folks that have a really different experience working at the organization and stick around longer. Lord knows it takes a lot of energy to train somebody. So anyway, this is something that I've kind of always gone to in my end of the pool, our little duplex here, nursing and advocacy.
Yeah, it's all about the sharing of power, back to where we started. If we can manage to do that in smaller ways, then it can self-advance into bigger ways and give us better job satisfaction, people who can stay in their positions longer, regardless of the trauma and the difficulties, and make it more satisfying to do so. So I think on to our last one, and then we have a couple of minutes. We'll take some questions. Let's move past that one to the next one.
There it is. So just leaving this parting thought, this is basically the last paragraph of the entire SADE report, and it's an organizational recommendation. If you want to do this work better, this is the work that you need to be doing. And that last sentence, I think, is just incredibly, incredibly important, given what we have to contend with as leaders and as organization and as staff. And without adequate support and without, you know, really talking about the difficult situations that our organizations are placed in, we can't do anything different. We will repeat the same stuff again and again, and we won't be able to advance. So if there was ever a clear argument for, you know, really zeroing in on secondary trauma as not just a nice thing you do, not just as an aspirational goal, but as a center point of your work, I think it's right there. So we have probably basically no time, but we'd love to take any questions, hear from folks. Yeah, anything that comes up from your practice or anything that we can attempt to make clearer. We are beginners in all of this. Well, I am, Jenny. I don't know about you.
About the same. Always new stuff to learn. So Crystal, if you don't mind going down one more slide, we'll take questions. If anybody's got them, pop them over into the chat. And I don't know what kind of time frames we're at. If we absolutely have.
We have a little bit more time to answer all of our questions. I don't want anybody to not have time to answer their questions. One of the things I've done in the chat box, I've posted the link to our exit evaluation. So if people could please do that if they do need to go before we're done answering questions. So, but yeah, we're here and we want you to get the information you need.
Right. And if you go down to the very last slide, they've got contract information on there. I am super happy and fortunate to be able to do some technical assistance and training with TASA. So if you guys have questions about this or want to have more extended conversations about it, or about anything that has anything to do with the nursing end of what happens in sexual assault response, please feel free to reach out. Be happy to talk with you.
All right, we've had several asks about getting a copy of the slides.
Sure, we can sure do that if that's okay with you all.
So we can figure out a solution for that.
Okay.
So
I'm going to scroll back up to see if there were questions that happened earlier on that we've already scrolled past.
It's true that this is a SADI finding that all of these interventions require the buy-in of executive level leaders and funders. It's really, really hard to do this without those folks being on board. And I think for me, that's why it's so important to be able to appeal to an evidence base. It's not just something that I want to do because I'm a little squishy and I care about people. It's because folks with PhDs can go out there and demonstrate that you make progress when you work in these ways. I think that's a really important part of what we were able to dig up here.
It is, and it's probably also worth mentioning that this is not, we need to buy new equipment. This is not, we need to have more people. This is stuff that we just can refine on our own that doesn't require expenditures that come out of your capital fund or from wherever.
But boy, I bet some of these citations would look great in a grant. We want to use the same system that MD Anderson uses.
Indeed.
Cutting edge. It writes itself.
Chickens are across the street.
Okay. My chickens are across the street.
They're in the
Uh-oh.
they're like at their house.
We are not, I'm seeing some questions about CEUs. We are not providing CEUs for our trainings right now, but we're working on bringing that feature back. So these are important things, and time is important, and we want to bring that back. So.
A question about, are we offering this training again soon? I don't know. Jenny, what are you doing tomorrow?
Yes,
Have this
talking
conversation anytime.
Yeah, please,
Good
please.
thing is this training was recorded, and if there weren't any technical difficulties, it's going to on our YouTube channel, so people can access that and watch it whenever they want to.
But maybe in parting, I just want to say, thank you, all of you who were able to make time and share space with us today to talk about this stuff. It's very, very near and dear, as much as the field is itself, taking care of the folks that are coming behind us doing the work. I'm gonna start crying if I say too much more about that. So thank you all again very, very much. And let us know if we can help you out.
Yeah, please do. It's a great pleasure and also a delight to get to talk about these things.
So I'm going to post the link to the training evaluation one more time, and y'all can fill this out, please, if you haven't done so. We're going to let Jenny get her chickens. So, all right, there it goes. Send that out correctly. So, all right, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.